Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many fresh faces, and I can see that I'm familiar with only a few faces, and I think this is a very good sign because we need fresh faces in this campus so that we can have meaningful interaction as academicians, as scholars. So I'm very delighted to have come here, and let us go straight to the topic. The topic that I'm proposing to discuss today is about historical method. When we talk about research methodology in social sciences, history is also part of social sciences, and the kind of techniques or methods that have been used in history are also relevant in some social researches. And especially when we are looking at issues, even current social research, where you need to revisit the past, when you need to look back historically, like in educational research or even in psychological research, I feel that historical methodology is also something relevant, and that is why I'm proposing here this topic for today. So, here the first thing that we have is a little understanding about history. In very layman terms, we used to say like history is something that happens in the past. Well, if we consider all those things as history, then it's very difficult to create a coherent understanding of the past, because what I just did before I came into this room could also be part of history, if that is considered as the layman understanding of history. But that is something very difficult to comprehend. So history could be a meaningful record, evaluation, systematic analysis, and synthesis of evidence concerning human achievements. And now there are diversification in historical research, not only of human as well, but basically in traditional understanding, history is about a meaningful record, evaluation, and systematic analysis and synthesis of human achievements in the past. Now there are many branching out in history, for example, human-animal relations, or what we call it entangled lives. Okay, because human and animals have interactions for millennia, and so that interactions may have some impact on both species, the human, the anthropogenic, and the non-anthropogenic. So many people are talking about even what we call transitioning being, for example, or liminal stage. Liminal stage means, for example, in human history, when human and animal are sharing the same space, and where you have this blurring of the line between human and animal existence. For example, you have creatures like werewolf, for example, who could turn into human being sometimes, and who could turn into animals at some point of time. So those are what we call liminality, for example. liminal stage. So this is where history is branching out today, because traditional historical understanding is found to be inadequate in many instances, and therefore history is an integral account of relations between persons, events, times, and places. And when we talk about historical method, this was first introduced by John Bowden in the 16th century on his source criticism of history, which is entitled Methodes ad facilem historiarum cognitionem. So that is how I would like to first introduce history. And by extension, it is very difficult to exist in the present without referring back to the past. Because the past is not an immutable past. The past is unimmutable. The past is not muted. The past is still, impacting our lives in several ways. Let me give you a very brief example. The past, in the context of India, for example, in 1947, we have faced partition, right? The partition of India. And it was a poignant chapter in our Indian history because millions have perished because of that partition. But that lingers on, okay? The wounds of partitions are still not disappearing. And revisiting the partition in historical research is very important. And even in politics, the partition wounds are still quite afresh. And the reason why, for example, the Indian government is calling for Citizenship Amendment Act could also be traced back to that partition, okay? Because after partition, there are many stranded populations, either in Pakistan or in Bangladesh, who do not have the chance to be repatriated to India, and then be accepted as a full citizen. So the Citizenship Amendment Act was intended to provide amenities and amelioration of the conditions of these people who have been stranded elsewhere in Bangladesh or in Pakistan. So this is something in which the past is still a very active player in our current contemporary context. Now, when we talk about historical research relevance, it is a very important aspect in the development of theory and practice, and its relevance as a research method in all subject disciplines, and although very little different from other research methods also. The most notable difference that we can see from historical research and all other methods available to the researcher is the nature of evidence used to generate theory or test the hypothesis in history. The kind of evidence that is available in historical research may be different from in political science or in sociology or in social work. So in history or in historical research, data is already there. Data is not generated. In other social research, data is generated by collecting information, right? Isn't so? Am I right? Okay. We generate data by collecting vital informations, and we process through quantitative or qualitative methodology using sampling methods, sampling of various methods, sampling procedure, and then maybe we quantify it, right? Or so in history, the data already exist in one form or another, unlike other methods. Okay. And so what are the data in history? It is the documents that has been kept maybe in the archives, or maybe in some personal possessions, personal diaries of notable individuals, okay? And maybe some of their, even the newspaper clippings of 100 years ago, okay? So those can be data in history. And historical research is concerned with reconstructing the past. So its main business is to reconstruct the past, because since so many things happens in the past, even in the past half a day today, right? From say 5 a.m. this morning till 11:30 today, there's so many things that happens, okay? And so we cannot recapture everything that happened in the past, but selectively, if we want, we can try to reconstruct the past. And so since historical research is concerned with reconstructing the past, identifying pieces of puzzle and putting them together to provide insights and understanding of situations, even a process. But my fair warning is that no matter how hard you try, you cannot reconstruct the entirety of the past. Okay? You can, with the best historical data, you can reconstruct only a minor fraction of the past. Okay? All right. So even then, that could be quite significant and insightful. So what do we want to achieve while reconstructing the past? The first point is to reveal or uncover the unknown. Because after half a century, or maybe a century or more, okay, people don't remember. Okay, although there may be some faint remnants of informations, but the vast majority of informations about events, places, particular individuals may vanish for the new generations after maybe 150 years, 200 years. So for example, the only reason why we can recall the revolt of 1857, where the Indian freedom fighters were fighting for their independence from the British colonial rule, we could recapture or uncover or reveal those informations only by searching through the informations left by the participants of those events, which may have been kept in archives and some record rooms in a very dilapidated district collector's office, for example. Okay, and very few years ago in Aizawl, we have the Deputy Commissioner record room, which was entirely burned down because of a fire incident. But very fortunately, or I would say, my department had done digitization of the records kept in that Deputy Commissioner office, which was not in a very good condition. Some papers are very old, brittle, and so we digitize those things, those informations. And now, suppose that had not happened, all those informations could have vanished. Okay, so through that, we are saving vital informations about the past. And then the second set of aims that is relevant for conducting historical researches to answer questions which have yet been answered. There may have been different events in the past. Some may be very good, memorable events. Some may have been very unsavory memories or things that happened in the past. So a lot of questions may have arisen as to whether what happened on that particular fateful day. Why did it happen? How did it happen? For what reason? So to provide answers to those questions, historical research used to be conducted. And the second thing is to search and identify the relationship of past happening and their links with the present. Okay, this is something very crucial because to search and identify the relationship of past happenings. In the past, some events may have happened. And how did this past event is linking with the present conditions is very important. If we look at the trajectory of our Indian economy, for example, from 1947, say for example, in economic history terms, why our country is in the current state of affairs economically. To understand that, we need to re-evaluate the policies that have been implemented in the past, right? And where those policy implementations and interventions have failed to deliver for the citizens of India. Okay, why China is surging ahead of India? Okay, what did China do in the past 20, 30 years? So I was listening the other day a very interesting lecture by a renowned economist. He was saying the Chinese found their savior in another Chinese not from mainland China. The Chinese, because under Chairman Mao, they failed miserably. Okay, the Great Leap Forward was a big disaster for China. It led to the death of millions of Chinese because of what we call starvations, famines. Okay. But from the 80s, China is surging ahead, right? India and China, we follow the same path of socialism. From 47, India will follow, China from 1949. Okay, after the Chinese Civil War was over in 1949, China under Mao followed the same Soviet model. Okay, and we continued in India till around 2001, until Narasimha Rao came to power. Okay, and in China, under Deng Xiaoping, they changed their trajectory. Okay, but then that lecture that I've listened to was saying Deng was copying the philosophy and the model of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Okay, so there, the adoption of policy and the adoption of interventions in economy could have resulted differently for two nations which are competing, which are emerging from the shadow of colonialism around the same time in the late 40s. Okay, so that is why to identify the relationship of past happenings and their links with the present is very important. And this is where historical methods can give us insights. Okay? And to record and assess past activities and achievements of individuals, agencies, and institutions. Okay? So here also, historical research record and assess past activities and achievements of individuals. So for individuals like, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru, in the context of India, like in the global context, we can have, for example, many notable individuals who have significant impact on world politics. Okay, so their past activities and achievements, and also institutions, like for example the institution which are very crucial for Indian democracy, like the constitution, the parliament. Okay, and then the last point is to assist in the understanding of human culture. To assist in the understanding of human culture. Human culture is evolving. It is a dynamic process, and to understand, in the understanding of this human culture, history can have influence. Okay. So there can be 5 stages of historical research. Number 1 is identification of a researchable phenomenon. Researchable. There may be some researchable and non-researchable topics or phenomena. Okay, right. In history, it may be quite difficult to research, for example, what we call celestial bodies, like the sun or the comets. Okay, there are such, so we need to identify what are researchable and what are not. Okay, and the second stage is development of hypothesis or research questions, and also identification of theoretical perspectives. Okay, I think we are all familiar with this identification of hypothesis and research questions, so there is no need to repeat for my part, but what I would like to add here is that identification of a theoretical perspective is important. Like for example, what kind of theory is relevant? Okay, structuralism, post-structuralism, or Marxist theory, or we can say in purely historical terms, we can talk about the subaltern approach, for example. Okay, because in historical study in the past, let's say till the 70s, historical research was dominated by elitist approach. Okay, elitist means only the elite wrote history, and their main focus was about the elite classes. Okay, so if you look at Indian history also, people talk about Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, for example. Those are stalwarts of Indian politics in those days, right? Do we talk about ordinary farmers, right? Do we talk about ordinary school or college students who have paid their lives in the non-cooperation movement, in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? No, we did not. So history was seen to be very elitist in the past. But from the 70s, there are new interventions in the form of annals, school, which we will discuss later on, and then the subaltern. Subaltern means it is derived from the understanding derived by an Italian Marxist, okay, Antonio Gramsci. How many of you have heard Antonio Gramsci? Gramsci? Yes, okay, thank you. So, from the Gramscian understanding, this subaltern methodology came into being, wherein their main focus was to understand the lives of ordinary people. Because if you understand only the lives of the elites, you don't have a comprehensive understanding of the past. So in order to have a more comprehensive, more holistic understanding of the past, you need to see both sides of the coin. Okay, not only the elite perspective, but also the common man's perspective as well. Okay, and data exploration and collection stages, I think these are all almost the same as other research methods. Checking of facts, evaluation of validity and reliability of data, and the analysis of evidence gathered from each source, and then writing the reports. Okay, I'll skip that. So in history, we have very important foundational understanding for research, that is sources. As I've said at the beginning, the sources in history are already existed. Okay, it's not manufactured or it's not generated. The sources or the data are already there. So we divided the sources into two primary and secondary sources. Okay, the primary sources are first-person accounts that involve the oral or written testimony of eyewitnesses, and this may include documents, letters, observational notes, photographs, recordings, diaries, journals, life histories, drawings, mementos, and other relics. Okay, so first-person account means the account of a person who witnessed the event. Okay, right? So, regarding the partition of India, for example, if you want a primary source, you need to read the first-person account of those people who participated or have witnessed. Okay. And so this may include documents, written documents, letters, observational notes, photographs. Photographs are very important now. We call in history visual history. Okay, visual history, because photographs can tell a lot of informations which may have been frozen in time. Okay, but you may be, if you look at the photograph, you can see there may be a number of informations in the expression of the person who have been photographed, for example, whether he was happy or he was jubilant or he was sad, okay? All these expressions can also be captured in the photographs. So in that way, photographs are visual history or visual aspects of historical records are very important. And recordings. Recordings can be either in audio-visual or only in audio mode. Okay, diaries, journal, life histories, drawings, mementos, and other relics. Drawings also, because the drawing, for example, whether it is a very sophisticated, modern drawing, realist, or abstract drawing, or a very ancient drawing, like the cave drawings in France, which are dated to be about 20,000 years old. Okay, in the cave they're drawing basic drawings, But those drawings can tell informations about what life would be in those days, okay? And what kind of danger they face daily, and what could be their daily mode of life, okay? Because in those early days, like in the year BCE 20,000 or more, life would be mostly governed by what we called hunting and foraging. Okay, no domestication of plants and animals have taken place those days. So basically, people must have forage for what is available in nature and hunting the game. Okay, and primary sources are usually original artifacts. Okay, original artifacts, original, not replica. Okay, documents and items related to the direct outcomes of an event or an experience. And generally, primary sources are created at or very near the time of the historical events that is being described. Okay, so later on we are going to argue whether those historical sources are authentic or not. Okay, but the point here is that they are created at or very near the time of the historical event. Okay, right? Suppose now I'm writing about the partition of 1947. Can it be a primary source? No, because so many years have gone. Okay, 75 years have gone, right? So for a historical primary source to become primary source about the event of partition, it should have been created either in 1947, 48, 49, okay, very close by to that particular event. Because when time passes, memory actually dims, and memory sometimes fail us. Okay, so after 10 years, what we understand and remember may slowly become diluted. Okay, so usually primary sources are created very close, very near the time of the actual historical event, so that the originality, the authenticity can be maintained. Okay, and another primary source that we have is oral sources. Oral means which are spoken by word of mouth. Okay, those are interviews. So in many social science research, we do interviews, right? We do a lot of interviews, and where oral history interview is also part of it. Okay. But here, oral sources are very important, because for oral sources to become primary source, it has to be originating from the person who actually had first-hand witness of a particular event. Okay? If it is from a third person, it cannot be a primary source. But suppose I witnessed the partition of India in 1947, and if some people come and interview me, the informations that I have given and the things that I have witnessed, if I have given those informations, they can be part of the primary source. But if, for example, somebody come and interview me, gather those information, and that person who interviewed me for the first time had been interviewed by another person, that information would not be primary source anymore, because he was not part of the eyewitness. Okay, and electronic version of sources such as edited or translated collections of letters or documents, images of maps or paintings or facsimiles. Okay, so these days, like Google Books or Internet Archives, they have scanned and documented many very old documents, right? Books, rare books, accounts. Those electronic version can also be primary source because they are converted to electronic format only without altering the content. Okay, the content remain the same, only the medium has been changed from a physical paper and ink to a digital mode. Okay, so then those things can be considered primary source as well. And coming to the secondary sources, these are account descriptions of persons who are not eyewitnesses of the event, or who did not personally know the person being studied. So, for example, Ramchandra Guha. How many of you heard Ramchandra Guha? Okay. Ramchandra Guha had written a book called India After Gandhi. Okay, India After Gandhi. So he had used many primary sources from archives and the original letter written by Gandhi also. But Ramchandra Guha book Gandhi After Independence could not be a primary source because Ramchandra Guha have never met Gandhi. Okay, he used the informations from the archives and the collections of informations from some individuals who have kept some personal letters and diaries of Gandhi. Okay, and then secondary sources are produced by persons not immediately present at the time of the event, and these are referred to as second-hand or hearsay accounts of someone, some happenings or some developments. Okay, hearsay accounts means secondary accounts or second-hand information. Okay, and secondary sources can be in the form of biographies, scholarly articles, popular books, reference book, so on and so forth. Okay, newspaper articles also. And when we talk about secondary sources, its basic function is it synthesizes the source. Okay? It synthesizes the sources, it analyzes and interprets primary sources. We may take many inferences from other works for our research purpose. And so here the secondary sources usually are giving us a synthesis of what has been already done, the analysis done by others. So it's kind of more of a summary of the existing works that has been done. And most secondary sources in historical research are done by professional historians, but popular writers and journalists also write books and articles about historical subjects. Okay, but the kind of historical works written by professional historians and popular writers and journalists are different in their usage of the primary sources. Okay, popular writers usually sought or wrote for popular audience, and professional historians wrote for the consumption of academicians. So the focus is different, and that's why the use of sources are also a little bit different. For popular consumption, You may not cite too many sources, because if you cite too many sources, it becomes very uh, boring for the layman. Okay, and therefore, in many popular history books, they avoided sources, citations of sources. And secondary sources also inform about the ways in which other historians have understood and interpreted events. Okay, so other historians, how they studied that particular same events. Okay, and how they interpreted the events. So in secondary sources, you can have all those informations, how other scholars have done. And then the secondary sources also reflects the issues and interpretations that are the subject of controversy and debate among professional historians. Okay? Right? There can be many subjects of controversy in the context of India also. Okay? Even in the character of Gandhi, for example, or his personal conduct. Okay? Right? There may be people who are not entirely satisfied with Gandhi's personal conduct of life, okay? When it comes to sexuality, for example, okay? Right? So, there may be a subject of controversy and debate among professional historians. In that, how they understood are reflected in those secondary sources. And so, for example, another thing is on feudalism debate. Feudalism was a European phenomenon in the medieval period, okay? And feudalism was a system which governed European society, because Europe at that time was an agrarian society. So feudalism was the mode of production. According to the Marxian terminology, feudalism was the mode of production which governs the agrarian society of Europe. And many Indian historians, like for example, D.D. Kosambi, R.S. Sharma, they were trying to apply that European feudalism to the context of India, pre-British India. Okay, so there are a lot of debates. Okay, debates. So we call it feudalism debate in the context of India, right? Among professional historians, some argue that what India witnessed was not comparable with those of Western Europe, and Western Europe may have been a classical example of feudalism, whereas India was not in that position. Okay, so there can be a lot of debate. There can be a lot of debate among scholars about, for example, the birth of, or what we call the emergence of communalism in India. Okay, right? Communalism debate is also a very lively debate among scholars in Indian history. And we have these tertiary sources. These sources usually do not reflect new historical research, rather they summarize and synthesize secondary sources. So they are not very effective, but they do provide a summary and synthesis of secondary sources. So you can refer to encyclopedias, dictionaries, and textbooks for this kind of sources. Okay. So like for example, Britannica, okay, it can give you some certain summaries and synthesis of the discussions about debates on issues that have taken place among scholars. Now, when we look at these two sources, primary and secondary sources, both can change sometimes. So the status of a source as primary or secondary does not depend on how old the source is, but rather on the historical questions one is asking. So, just merely a text is very old, 100 years old, does not make it a primary source. Okay. Rather, the kind of historical questions that has been asked is going to decide whether this is a historical primary source or not. Because if it cannot answer directly the historical questions that has been asked, it may not be a primary source. So the status of a source or source as primary or secondary depends on the focus of one's research. Okay. So your research, if it focus on a particular aspect, someday what may be considered in other research area as a secondary source can become a primary source for you. All right. So let us look at the uses of these two sources. The primary sources allow a researcher to enter the lives and minds of the people that are studied. Okay. So, Jawaharlal Nehru had written a book called A Tryst with India. Sorry, not A Tryst with Destiny. Okay. In that book is the autobiography of Jawaharlal Nehru. So if you read, you can understand or you can enter his life and minds. Not entirely, but a part of his mind, his thought process can be understood through this. Okay? Right? So that is why secondary sources are very important, primary sources are very important. For example, in the context of Mizoram, Mizoram was also part of the colonial British Empire till 1947. So there was one officer who served here in Mizoram. Those days it was called Lusai Hills. So the title of his book was Lusai Chrysalis. Lusai Chrysalis. The author was Anthony Gilchrist McCall, okay, A.G. McCall. So in that particular book, he wrote what he perceived about the Mizo society. What were their aspirations? Okay, he gave his frank opinion about the Mizo aspirations and how Mizo were seeking to fulfill those aspirations. Okay. So he criticized, for example, the education system that was imparted. He said the education that was given to the Mizos in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in Mizoram was actually instead of enabling, okay, and helping them to survive in the present context, it made them critical of their own situation and it made them more indolent. Okay, indolent. He said, Mizos don't need higher education. They need to survive first. So for their survival, they need how to cultivate, how to clear the jungle, sort of those things. So, from a very anti-colonial perspective, that was very detrimental for the Mizos because he was not having any sympathy for the Mizos. But from his own perspective, that was, again, he believed was the only option. So, when we look at this kind of writings, you can understand a lot of the insights left behind by the authors, by the eyewitness about certain subjects or events. Okay, so there can be a lot of debate about all these things. So, for example, in the context of India, we have in colonial times the Orientalist, Orientalism. How many of you have heard Orientalism? Okay, Orientalism was an effort to promote Indian culture, languages, and the sciences and the knowledge that was there not only in India, in the Orient, in the East. Okay, but there is a contending force called say Western learning. Okay, enlightened philosophy. It was against Orientalism. Okay, Oriental knowledge, according to that, was not perfect. Oriental knowledge was defective, and that is why in India people need Western Enlightenment philosophy, okay, Western education, correct? So in education we used to study the debate, the Woods Dispatch, and all those things, okay? There was a huge debate in British India also about the value of Orientalism and the contradictory voices of Enlightenment philosophy, which try to impose Western values. Okay. And secondary sources provide a broader perspective on the events of the past and allow researchers to see them in context. Seeing them in context is very important because if you see things out of context, then you can miss the whole target. Therefore, having a broader perspective on the events of the past, and then also seeing those events within their own perspective is very crucial. So, we're going to, till what time do I have? One. Okay. We're going to wind up very shortly. This is classification and verification of the body of sources. The aim of the source criticism is very important. Okay. This is mainly about classifying and verifying the sources. And so the first thing is, there is source criticism in historical methods. Source criticism basically aims to verify the sources. Okay, verify the sources. So there are two, external and internal criticism. Okay, through external criticism, one can examine the authenticity of a source. Okay, through external criticism. And through internal criticism, one can question the credibility of what has been written inside the document or the source. Okay, so the validity of historical research can be established through external criticism, while its reliability is determined by external criticism. So we will explain briefly what are these two, internal and external criticism. The first one is external criticism. So basically, external criticism asks about the authenticity of the source. The authenticity, whether it is actually what it claims to be. Okay? So primary sources, primary concern of external criticism is the genuineness of the resource materials. Okay? Somebody claims that this is the primary source, this is the original. Okay. Nowadays, I do not know other states. Even in my states, there are many fake driving license, right? Okay, fake driving license. There are some very good people who are very good in this modern digital technology. Okay, they can create almost same replica of the original. So there are many fake certificates also, but without proper examination, you will not understand that they are fake. Okay, so the primary concern of this external criticism is the genuineness of the resource material, and it is very important for researchers to evaluate the sources they are going to use with great care. Okay, great care. Somebody might claim that this is the original written by Mahatma Gandhi. This is the diary. Okay, but how do you know that is really genuine or not? It's important. Okay, you have to decide. You have to establish that it is genuine or not, or even get verification from experts. So you need to get verification from experts sometimes if you cannot do it yourself. Okay, to ensure the sources are authentic, to avoid frauds, hoaxes, or forgeries, because these are not uncommon and can prove to be problematic later on for the research outcome, because somebody one day point out that the source that you're using are fake sources, then your whole life research will be condemned. Okay, right? That is why not only in history, but also in all other research, social research, or even in scientific research, we need to be very careful about our sources. Otherwise, our life work could become nothing. So, to understand or to establish the authenticity through external criticism, what a researcher needs to do is to pose a number of key questions. Important questions have to be framed and asked to verify the veracity, the authenticity of the source. Okay, so first is the issue of provenance. Okay, the issue of provenance. This means that can the document be traced back to the office or person who is supposed to have produced it? Can you trace back the document to where it has been issued? Okay. Or could it have been planted somewhere else? Okay. Right. There may be an official government document. Okay. Like, for example, in the context of government, white papers. When there are great political disturbances, political leaders sometimes used to issue white papers. So whether those white papers are actually authentic or not, to understand that, to establish that, can the document be traced back to the office or the person who is supposed to have produced it, or in the middle somewhere, somebody might have planted that document. Okay. And then another important questions which can verify the authenticity is, what about the contemporary reputations of the source? The contemporary reputations. Okay. Whether the contemporaries and actually have knowledge about that. Okay. Suppose a document was produced in 1970. Okay. Right. As I said, the white paper about Mizoram, um, Mizoram in the history of Mizoram, we have what we call Kokom. Kokom was um, a government overbearing policy of rounding group of villages together for security purposes to defeat the MNF insurgency. Okay, so they group 10 villages together. Whether the villages are willing or not doesn't matter. They just burn the villages and then herd them together like animals and put them in one places. Okay, so there are some documents that has come out during those times in the 70s, but people who are knowledgeable in the 70s, did they know that document was there in 70s? Okay, it's very important. If they have no idea that this document exists in the 1970s, then maybe this document have been planted somewhere, maybe later on, or maybe it is a fake document. Okay, so the idea and understanding of the contemporary reputation of the source is very important. Okay, and then second thing is the content of the document needs to be examined for consistency with known facts. What has been written in the documents? Okay. If it is vastly different from what happened in those days, okay, right? It may not be really true or authentic. Okay. So we need to use our common sense and intellect. Okay. So what has been written by the author in the text, if the informations that has been given in the text are vastly inconsistent with what actually are taking place those days through common knowledge, if they contradict too much about common knowledge of a particular period of time, then they may not be authentic. Okay? And the third is the form of the document may yield vital clues. The form of the document. Okay? The form. Form means what? The appearance also. The size, the form, and even the ink, for example. So the other day we had a discussion with my colleague. There was a debate. He was debating with one theologian. And the theologian was saying that there is one particular place where, inside Mizoram only, missionaries were working, European missionaries. Okay, so that missionaries are independent missionary bodies, and across the border in Chin Hills, there was American Baptist missionaries working. So it seems that the theologian had produced one document written with ball pen. Okay, written with ball pen in 1920s. Okay, in 1920s there was no ball pen. Okay, right? Okay, so we need to question not only the content, but also the material and the forms. Okay. The theologian was alleging that there was a meeting at a particular place between that particular missionaries working in that area and the missionaries from Chin Hills to decide about their area of operations, to come to mutual understanding so that they don't overlap each other. Okay. But the document was written in Bolton. Okay. So that actually, how would we put it? That was a very important red flag. No, very important red flag, because do you have ball pen in the 1920s? No. In the 1920s, it was only fountain pen. Okay? And lastly, researchers can call on the help of technical specialists to examine the material used in the production of the document. So, for example, this is related to what I just related. Okay, the papers, the ink, okay, all these. So you have to be most like a Sarlokian. No? You need to be a little bit a detective, so you can understand those documents, whether they are genuine or not, whether they are authentic or not. Okay, now internal criticism. This is about the historicity of the facts, the data contained in the documents. So to determine the reliability of the source, its trustworthiness is questioned. The trustworthiness of the document have to be questioned, like what were the perception of the author, what are his personal biases of the phenomenon that he was writing about, and whether the author is reporting from intimate knowledge or from others' description of the event. Okay, so this is also very important, internal criticism. So the trustworthiness of the source have to be questioned by examining the perception of the author. What are his perception? Okay. And also, what are his personal biases about the subjects or the phenomena? And so, in a typical case, of a written document, external criticism aims to establish by whom, when, where, how, and in what situation the source was created. Whom? Who created the document? Okay. Who created the document? So, for example, when you go to the government archives or private archives, you will find many documents written by individuals, maybe government officials. So, for example, if you look at colonial reports, it will be written by a colonial official, right? So, by whom? A colonial official. When? The date. Because in that documents, the date may be there, and where, in which location he was writing, and how, and in what situations he was writing those things are very important. Okay. And sometimes, for whom the document was written is also very important. Okay, for whom? For whose consumption the document was produced. Okay, right? Because if I'm going to write, for example, today, for the entire Mizoram population, or if I'm going to write for only my friend, a personal friend, an individual friend, what would be my level of expression? For the entire public, I may be less frank, maybe, right? Is it so? Because it is going to be a public consumption. And if I write too frankly, then people may not be happy, okay, right? But if I wrote only for my friend, I may use many frank expressions about particular issues and some events. I may be very frank. Okay. I may wrote very frankly. I may condemn many people also. But for a public consumption, like in a press statement, I may not be able to do such kind of thing. Right? So where did I wrote, the context in which I wrote the information, the context in which a person wrote certain reports may guide the outcome of his work. So that is why mm, internal criticism is very crucial. And then external criticism depends in large part on the researcher's ability to discern anachronism. Anachronism is trying to understand um, um, what we call trying to understand the past from today's context is basically anachronism. Okay, so you read history books and you think that all people are so cruel, so bad, because you tend to look at from today's context, today's perspective, because you don't place yourself in that historical context. Okay, right? Like for example, we have in our history, we will call it headhunters, for example, Lusais, Nagas, they were headhunters. Okay, they hunt heads. So from today's perspective, if you read, even if you belong to that Lusai tribe, you think that that is so bad, that is so mean. Why you hunt heads? Why you kill people? But that was part of their cultural practice. Okay? That was intrinsic to their basic daily life. Okay? So if you fail to put into that context, then you become culpable to anachronism. Okay? Anachronism means you are looking at from the contemporary perspective what happened in the past, and then you can have a lot of misgivings, but that has to be avoided. So anachronism have to be avoided. Okay. Now we will briefly glance through this major theoretical perspective and proponents. The first is Marx's interpretation of history, which we call it historical materialism. Okay, historical materialism. Um, Before historical materialism was developed by Karl Marx, and Marx's inspiration came from Hegel. Okay, and Hegel's view history as the unfolding of the world spirit or gist, which progresses through contradictions and their resolutions. There will be contradictions, and then that contradiction will finally be resolved. Okay, and this what Hegel called dialectical process, and this involves the synthesis of opposing ideas, okay, leading to the development of new stages in history. New stages in history means the old stage of history will be replaced by a new stage through conflicts generated by contradictions in ideas and opposition in ideas. Okay, and Hegel believed that history is rational and purposeful, moving towards the realization of human freedom within a rational state. Now, Hegel's philosophy had influenced later thinkers, including Marx, who adopted the dialectical methods to develop his theory of historical materialism. So we will not discuss much about Hegel's, but historical materialism is very important because today, when we look at historical materialism, many, especially in historical research, many people are still using historical materialist approach to understand society in the past. Okay, in Marx's understanding, human civilization had passed through several stages of production or mode of production, we call it, including hunting, gathering, slavery, feudalism, and capitalism. And then he predicted that communism would eventually emerge as the final contradictions with capitalism. and that will usher in a new stage called a stateless society. This theory is influential but criticized for being overly deterministic and simplistic. Determinism is very strong in Marx theory, okay, and it is too simplistic, and it put only economic factors as shaping the societal change and societal changes in societal structure. So many people are now questioning Marx's understanding. Next is annals. The annals are French school of history. They felt that human activities from different domains need to be synthesized to understand history as a whole. So they call for total history. Yes, we are going to wind up now. So the the annals school's understanding is very crucial for new intervention in historical research. And well, we will wind up now. Just the strength and weaknesses of historical research is that it provides people with possible instead of probable understanding. Not probable, but possible understanding. And the ability to take precautions rather than control possible future, because direct application of the past to the present can distort events and lead to erroneous conclusions. So you cannot just directly apply what happened in the past to predict the future. But you can take precautions of what happened in the past. Okay. Some people used to say that the past repeats itself, but the past do not repeat exactly like it happened in the past. Okay. So precautions should be taken. Unobtrusive nature of historical research can also be viewed as an advantage since research enterprise itself will not affect its subject matter. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.